Well, that's quite a view. Across those mountains is the desert. Would you believe this whole Los Angeles region was desert at one time? We get a reminder of that every year when we feel the hot wind blowing. It's dangerous and it's dry. The climate and the scenery can take on a whole new meaning when the brush that covers the hillside is dry and when the Santa Ana wind blows. A lot of my friends have lived here in Bel Air. It's an ideal situation. You've got peace and tranquility way above the traffic and the smog. And yet, Hollywood is only 2 or 3 minutes away. You just drive down that road there, and you'll find yourself on Sunset Boulevard. Bel Air grew up along the ridges and canyons of the Santa Monica Mountains. It's a wealthy suburb.
Before the war, these lots were considered valueless land. They were given away with encyclopedias as like coupons. And after the war, a new technology developed so that these houses then became sanctuaries for film stars and all sorts of people. And suddenly the land became valuable.
But its rural character has been carefully preserved. The roads are narrow and winding. Chaparral covers the hillside, pleasant enough to look at, but if it should ever catch fire, 1 acre of this brush would burn like 2,000 gallons of gasoline.
The chaparral, or the native bushes and brush that grows here, have, through the God knows how many years, developed the ability to survive without any water. And the way they do that is to store oil in their systems.
This mesquite that we have here, this oily bush that grows on the hillside, is literally packed with oil. And it gets to the point where it quite literally explodes.
The brush is at its driest and most explosive in the late fall, which is precisely the season when the hot Santa Ana wind blows in from the desert.
It's, I guess, like a Mistral or the Arabian Khamsin or those kind of hot winds that are supposed to drive men mad, and the legionnaires, remember, go bury themselves in the sand or flee out into the desert, that kind of thing.
You must understand that flames can move through the brush in Southern California at the same speed at which the wind is blowing, and we get 60 and 70 mile an hour winds in those fires.
I have seen it outrun a deer, and deer are quite swift.
People accept high risk of fire as a small price to pay for the pleasures of living in Bel Air.
We didn't give it any special consideration until the big one, World War II, as it were.
The richest people in the world live here, and after all, why should they live here if it's so particularly high fire? It's a wonderful, it's the most beautiful area in America, they say. I love it.
To the Los Angeles Fire Department, November 6, 1961, was not just another day. It was a day when they knew conditions were right for a brush fire.
We had been notified much earlier in the morning that it was a red day, Santa Ana condition, wind that is. The humidity was low, the fuel moisture was low. All of the indices that we use indicated that if we had a fire, it would be a bad one.
Now, I recall going in and saying to my wife that if this continues, we're going to have a great big fire sooner or later, and this is the worst possible moment for some idiot to drop his cigar in the bushes.
It was a day something like this. That is, it was a lovely day, and there was a wind blowing like this. And when you have a brush fire of that nature in Southern California with this kind of wind, you have a prescription for a catastrophe.
The first signs of fire were seen at 8:10 in the morning by some contractors clearing brush. They raised the alarm. The first firefighters to arrive were able to stop the fire spreading east and west. But the strong wind was blowing it south toward the houses of Bel Air, and there was no holding it.
I looked out the office window, saw smoke in the distance, and I called my wife, Jenny, and I had smoking up there. What gives? Something like that. And she didn't even know about it.
My businessman called me and said, the whole Bel Air is burning. I said, well, what can I do about it? He says, nothing.
The rap on the door when the fireman told me I had to leave was when I really panicked. Then I realized that this was serious. And your mind just blanks out completely. All you can think of is get out of here as fast as you can before you lose your life. And that's it, you run.
I was one of the first reporters to go into the field. We could see the pall of smoke. We could smell it. It was low to the ground. It was as though a dark cloud had passed over the Southern California sky, and there were a lot of embers dropping out of the sky and into the street, and we began to see people coming down out of the hills.
A major emergency was declared. All units and units from the neighboring counties rolled out to meet it. The houses in the path of the fire stood no chance. This was no longer simply a brush fire. It was a major house-to-house conflagration.
The officers were waving everyone away, but they did let me through. I told them that I lived in here, my family was up here, and I had to get through, and they waved me on. But I don't think anyone got through after that. I closed the garage door, went out in the back, got up on the roof, and went to work. And by that time, the fire had hit and just lit up like a Christmas tree.
Coming up the hill, it was like a roar. When it reached the top of the hill, it was like thunder. It was clapping. It was a sound almost too deep to put into words. I'd never heard anything like that before. It sounded almost maybe warlike.
Two tanker trucks appeared on the scene. To give you an idea of the noise, I yelled at them because they were looking across the street at the houses burning, and they were so far gone there wasn't any hope for them. I yelled at them to give me a hand. They couldn't hear me.
I know I've seen pictures of the movies that I took, and it was either me shaking or the fire was making things shake. The glass began to shake. The lamps began to shake as in an earthquake. Our dog began howling. Somehow I wasn't afraid of losing the house because I was here. It wasn't going to happen to me. More than anything else, I was convincing myself. But then immediately after the tremendous impact of the flames, and it takes maybe 10 or 15 seconds for the flames to reach their peak, I remember running out of the house and jumping on the roof, climbing up the side there and getting on the roof, and physically putting out the flames that had started in maybe 10 or 20, maybe 30 places with my hands.
One fireman stayed with me for 3 hours. Without that extra help, I don't think we'd have been able to hold it.
I put the flames out wherever they came. And really no big deal. It's your own home.
I talked to many people on the way down, and I said, what have you got? What did you take? One fellow said, I got this bottle of scotch, and his wife said, I've got the pictures of the kids, you know, and the marriage license.
I had a new car that I bought not very long ago, and my wife's rather intelligently suggested that we take both cars, and I said, no, we must go together. I mean, that's matrimony. And I took the old car out and put it in the street, and we put our stuff in it, and the new car remained in the garage during the entire fire, of course.
But everywhere I went, I always saved these little match folders as souvenirs. And just to show you how your mind works under a moment of panic like that, this is what I threw in the suitcase. This is what I saved. No clothing, nothing useful. Matches.
The ship model Rob made and things that they'd given me when they were little, that's all. Nothing really valuable, just something that you could never replace. You can always buy fur coats or diamonds or jewels, but you couldn't buy those pictures. That's what I took. That and Vaseline. Vaseline and clean underwear.
Funny story, I asked the butler, what did the dogs do? He says, well, the German, being a real clunky German, he started to bite the fire. The Yorkie ran after the mouse, which came out underneath, and the French poodle went in a Rolls Royce and waited to be driven away.
The firefighters now had to act defensively, get ahead of the fire, make a stand, knock it down, then move ahead again. That was the pattern, but conditions were against them.
No one could have conceived that the fire would spread as far as it did, as rapidly as it did. We found ourselves chasing the fire rather than getting ahead of it and stopping it.
Coordination became a nightmare. The emergency radio control was overloaded and jammed most of the time.
Our radio system gradually degraded as more and more companies got on scene. It became virtually impossible to communicate in our traditional manner, and it just became very, very difficult to control everybody and what they were doing.
And as the fire swept down from the north towards the southwest, we were assigned and then reassigned, and it happened to be my good fortune to be selected in each instance to try to stay ahead of the fire. And of course that was the best place to be because that's where the action was. And so I moved over probably 5 times during the course of the fire, set up a new command post only to lose it and move up to another one.
The thick black smoke darkened the sky as the fire spread, reducing visibility, increasing the pressure on the firefighters.
And I'd say that house down there is superheated. It's about to go, and this would be a large house, 7 to 10 rooms, a flat California-style bungalow, and it would explode into flame, and I'd hit the stopwatch. And in 60 seconds, it was gone. In 60 seconds, it had lost its framework. It was down.
But above all, there was the danger of flying brands. A piece of flaming brush or a wood shingle roof tile could be whipped by the wind and carried ahead of the main fire.
As your house burns down, when the shingle burns, where it's attached is the thinnest part of the shingle. So that when the shingle burns off, the thick butt is still capable of burning. It has a natural airfoil shape, so if there's a wind blowing, the shingles soar and sail very effectively.
You're located at a fire that is burning and with your fire engines, and you're trying to put the fire out, and maybe you are. In the meantime, the flying brands are being wind carried beyond you, downwind of course, and starting 1, 2, or however many fires that you don't know about.
By midday, the fire was approaching the biggest natural firebreak in the area, a canyon 2,800 feet wide, now a freeway.
There was a flaming brand that jumped the whole, what is now the San Diego freeway, that was thought to be a huge firebreak, started on the other side.
The neighboring district of Brentwood was now in danger. As the firefighters' resources were stretched even further, a second major fire broke out in the Santa Ynez Canyon only a few miles away. As the fire raced on, the firefighters knew they had to make a stand. They concentrated their forces in Mandeville Canyon.
Well, we felt we were going to hold it at Mandeville. We felt it from the beginning. Everything was working in our favor as opposed to an all-day long series of events that worked against us. We had a prognosis that the wind would die down a little bit. We had a similar prognosis that the humidity would come up. We knew we had more fire engines. We were beginning to get them from Sacramento and San Diego and from Nevada and Arizona. So we had, again, practically wall-to-wall fire trucks from sunset to the end of the canyon.
In the evening, they had their first break. The wind dropped slightly. They fought back all through the night, and by noon the following day, they were able to report that the fire had at last been contained, and they had prevented it from joining up with the Santa Ynez blaze. Early on the morning of the third day, it was under control, and the firemen were exhausted.
I really think they took it as hard as we did. They really did. They felt terrible that they couldn't help us save our homes.
And we had a young fellow that was holding a hose and the water was dribbling out of it and he was crying. I thought something was physically wrong with him, and I asked him what the matter was, and he says he just felt so helpless seeing these homes go up and not being able to do anything about it.
One of the neighbors down here on Chelan, they lost their home, but they erected a huge sign made commercially and said, "God bless you, you tried."
The smoke lifted, and the extent of the devastation was revealed.
No fire chief in his right mind would be happy with with an end result that it cost somebody 527 houses. I should be very happy and am that we lost no lives. We also had no serious injuries, which is almost unbelievable. But nobody likes to lose 500 houses.
There are millions of dollars worth of houses burned. Obviously, everybody else could have done it over here. Kim Novak was bright enough. She watered her roof. Bert Lancaster's house went. Well, the whole house went with furs, jewelry, silver, everything.
It was a mess, sure. The pool was black. The odor, there was a stench. There was a stench of burnt vegetation, of burnt drapes, of watered-down rug. It was no place to live for a while.
The thing that I remember most vividly is the ghastly smell.
Everything was lovely for about 500 yards, and I said, well, we're safe. And we turned around this bend, and it just looked like a bomb had hit.
Then I saw this horrible, horrible catastrophe, and I just knew there was no way that our house could have been saved. Terrible shock, and you just stand there in disbelief and start to cry because you've lost all your possessions and all the little things that you've saved from your children when they were tiny growing up, and all these little momentums, you know, that you've kept all these years, and they're gone. Everything's gone. You have nothing but just, you know, the clothes on your back, and it's a helpless feeling.
And our neighbors were just fantastic. They were just beautiful. I had people come up to me that I didn't know that offered me money, any amount of money I wanted. I had a fellow up at the top of the hill here, there's an apartment up there, a young single fellow. He said, you're staying here with your children tonight, and I'm leaving. I still don't know who he was. He just walked out and said, here's the key, and sleep here tonight.
Many Bel Air residents who had wooden roofs in 1961 have rebuilt them with less flammable materials. But not everybody believes that this is essential.
I saw houses that had rock roofs that literally exploded because the heat built up in the house.
I haven't changed the roof. I'll save it again if necessary.
At the time of the fire, the law required you to clear the brush to a distance of 30 feet from your house. Now, the minimum safe distance is 100 feet, largely due to the campaigning of Harriet Weaver.
We finally got everybody together, the homeowners, the fire department, the insurance companies. We had advice from the different city departments involved, from the Forest Service, all this, to try to work out a uniform set of standards that everybody would agree on. So it took 2 years of drawing up the ordinance and another year getting it through City Hall before we actually had it on the books.
The property behind me, I bought about an acre of land down there, and I keep it trimmed down below.
We've got the ordinance now, but can't get enforcement of it. And this is a problem because you have firemen who do not want to be in the position of harassing people. They are good guys. They're not like policemen. They're not punitive people. And so they just don't have their hearts in the enforcement work.
When we try to build fire stations or improve fire protection in an area, understandably, people would prefer that those improvements are done somewhere else.
You must learn to live and respect the natural world that you have intruded on. We haven't done that in the hills.
The family who lived in the house that stood here lost their home and everything they owned. The house is gone, but part of the garden is still here. And the streets look calm and confident. Yeah, I'm wondering if the '61 fire was a 1 in a million chance that couldn't happen again. Or could it be that someday when the Santa Ana's blowing and the brush is tinder dry, the whole story would be repeated? And would it be any different this time?
They've told me, many fire officials over the years, that in a firestorm on the scale of Bel Air, that there's no way they can hope to really put that out. They have to simply try to save structures and wait until they get a break in the winds or something to keep keep the damage down, but there's no way they can really come in. There are not enough men and equipment in the western United States, I suppose, to really put one out if it were blazing on a long front.
That's if a fire gets out of control. The approach of the Los Angeles Fire Department now is to prevent any fire, however small, from doing so.
Prior to Bel Air, it was the policy to send out fire equipment to see what kind of a fire was burning. And they got there and they looked at it and they said, hey, we need help. And they would shout on the radio and say, send more trucks. They learned that you can't do it that way. What you have to do is assume it's a major conflagration and hit it with everything you have. So nowadays, if you say there's a brush fire up in the hills right back here, they'll hit it with everything they have and stop it right now.
In 1961, the Los Angeles Fire Department had 1 helicopter. Now they have 10, including several which are equipped to carry out water bombing drops.
We control the drop pretty much by the altitude and the airspeed. If we want a long drop to cover a long area, we'll go at a higher speed and a higher altitude. If we want a more concentrated drop, we can slow it up and drop a little lower. Now, there is a problem with the Big Bird, of course. If you get too low, you stir up the fire. The downwash will really start beating up the fire and spread it. So you have to be somewhere between there. But you can control it pretty well.
But you know, helicopters are only a little part of it. It's sort of like the artillery in a war. You can't win a battle with the artillery. You still got to get the foot soldier or the firefighters got to really go in and put the fire out. That's where it's at.
A crucial weakness in the handling of the 61 fire had been the breakdown in communications. Only 2 radio frequencies had been available to the fire companies. Today, operations are directed from a computer-controlled communications center which has access to 14 channels.
At every fire, there's a tactical frequency for the fire companies that are operating, a minimum of 1 tactical frequency. There's a command frequency for the officers, and then there are other frequencies available for service functions and other things, so that we've divided up the radio frequencies, and we have much better capability of communicating today than we did before.
Last year alone, we had no major conflagration. We had a great many small fires, brush fires, small only because we were able to slow them down and get them there so the ground troops could come put them out.
Though the risk of a major fire in Bel Air has diminished, it is still high. But most Bel Air residents, even those who lost their homes in '61, wouldn't live anywhere else.
We decided that we still loved it here and that it wouldn't happen again. We would take precautions. And I just made up my mind that I was going to get to work and get back here as quickly as I could.
Hardly anyone moved. They moved out when their homes burned down, but they rebuilt as fast as they could and moved back in, because once you live in the hills, you wouldn't live anywhere else.
Today, the most important fact is that the fire happened. We saw it, and we know the extent of the damage it did. We know what kind of an enemy we were up against. And we know that that enemy could hit again and again. He'll give us a bad time. But at least this time, we'll be ready for him.
When Havoc Struck is another Mobile Showcase presentation. Brought to you by Mobile Corporation.